Hey, what's going on, guys? Today's topic: what's the worst thing you've ever seen someone do at a funeral? Well, this should be pretty fun, so let's hear some real stories from some real people.
Alright, so my brother-in-law is a mortician. Boy, does he have stories. One of the best: a guy disguised himself as a nun, shows up at the funeral, pulls a gun from under his habit and tries to shoot the deceased's son. Luckily the gun malfunctioned and didn't fire. The son then decks the nun and knocks him out, kicks him in the head a few times, and is pulled off by other family. The police are called, yada yada yada. Turns out the deceased owed the nun quite a lot of money, and the son had refused to honor the debt.
Don't start none, they won't be none.
Alright, so I took my ex to my grandma's funeral, even though he met her once, just for moral support, as it was a very unexpected death and I was super close to my grandma. Now, my ex likes to cosplay/dress up as rock stars. That being said, I told him to please tone it down. It's not the time or the place to show up dressed as Alice Cooper or Nikki Sixx. So, while he does tone it down slightly, he still shows up dressed in a big theatrical black trench coat, despite it being the literal middle of summer, with a red button down that was left half unbuttoned, and a bunch of giant-ass cross necklaces, not to mention a little Nikki Sixx makeup to top it all off. I remember asking him if he'd please reconsider changing into something that wasn't as intense. He got mad and accused me of being like his controlling mother. Now, I suppose his outfit doesn't sound bad, but in context, it was embarrassing as duck. My grandma was a little old God-fearing lady, and she of course had a group of friends she went to church with, not to mention all the people she went to school with, most of which even probably thought the Beatles were dressed too strange to be big hits. So, he was being whispered about and glared at the entire time, which he loved, because any attention was good attention in his eyes. He also signed her funeral book as Alice Cooper.
I went to the funeral of a co-worker's fiancé. The girl's ex showed up, and as people were lined up to say goodbye, we all witnessed him lean into the coffin and kiss her on the lips. I will repeat myself, the ex-boyfriend of the deceased woman kissed her dead body at her funeral, in front of her fiancé. Her brothers quite literally threw him out.
Those are the best brothers. My husband's brothers put themselves on pedophile watch at my wedding just in case my great uncle decided to show up.
Ha! That doesn't sound like a very great uncle to me.
Ugh. My uncle relentlessly flirted with a funeral home employee, all while at his dad's funeral. She was obviously deeply uncomfortable, and he was so narcissistic he actually thought she was interested.
At my father's funeral, one of my aunts asked my mom when would she get out of the house.
It's always awful to hear about greed ruining the family over the deceased person's will. It really shows people's true colors and proves that they were just waiting for the person to die rather than trying to enjoy their remaining time with them. Always breaks my heart.
When my stepdad died, 1962 motorcycle accident, his brother-in-law was calling and asking about his gun collection. It wasn't even 4 hours, for Christ's sake. His body probably wasn't even cold.
My sister murdered her father, my stepfather. At the time we didn't know she was guilty. By the way, just so you know, she did this purely for financial gain. During the viewing she dragged her little boy to the casket, and because he didn't cry enough to suit her, she pinched him on the upper arm until he was sobbing, then took him around to everyone, saying he was really crying because he loved his gramps so much.
Damn, it's wild that psychopathic people walk around among us.
Exactly. My stepfather told the family he was marrying his longtime girlfriend. My mom had passed away 10 years prior on Sunday, and by the next Friday he was dead and she was executor of his estate shortly thereafter. She had been daddy's little girl her whole life, but once she realized the will would be changed, the clock was ticking. It took her 5 days to conceive of the plan and to carry it out.
Not a funeral, but when my granddad passed and we went to view his body at the crematorium, my aunt started stealing from the facility the second the employee's back was turned, just shoving anything that wasn't nailed down into her purse and pockets. Unbelievable. And yes, we called her out and made her put it all back.
Do you mind me asking what the public spaces of a crematorium have worth stealing?
In my opinion, nothing, but according to my aunt, the pens, the miniature display urns, a candy dish with the candy, and some other random bits and pieces. I have no idea what her thought process was, if there even was one.
My uncle was pissed about something in my grandmother's will, so during the funeral, he went out to the parking lot and keyed everyone's car. It should be noted, he has a severe brain injury from a motorcycle accident that causes him to be constantly angry and paranoid, but still.
He handed out his business cards at his stepdaughter's funeral, There was very nearly a fist fight.
Good morning, Dwight Schrute. Thank you all for your prayers and your remembrances. Like Justin and his disfigurement, I too have had a horrible year. They say that the middle class is disappearing, and with it, the soul of America. So, as a gift to this beautiful congregation, I would like to offer a 4% discount on all Dunder Mifflin Sabre products if you buy a printer at full price.
What was the business? I'm guessing multi-level marketing.
Photography, actually.
That's just terrible, and I was going to say something very similar. My sister-in-law handed out pens with her name and real estate info on them at my father-in-law's funeral in 2014. It was so tacky. The natural response is to take what's handed to you, so everyone was walking around with pens.
My husband went to his great-aunt's funeral, and while they did the little ceremony in the cemetery, the great-aunt's granddaughters were all hiding behind a tombstone giggling and all doing coke.
Ha, I thought you were going to say, playing hide and seek behind the tombstone. That took a much different turn than expected.
Nah. Her grandkids were somewhere between 17 and 23.
Hide and tweak is more like it. So at the funeral of a young adult that killed himself, his best friend's farewell speech in front of everyone was,
Yo, thanks for not telling me you had suicidal ideas. It makes my grieving a lot easier.
I've never experienced such a heavy awkward silence. And also I never wanted to hit someone so bad.
So my nan told my dad at his own father's funeral that her pain was much greater, because she had lost a husband, while he had only lost his dad, as if grief is a competition. She is a shitty person anyway, and not even blood related to us, so we just kinda don't associate anymore. To add more, she called my dad last night, claiming that she and my granddad had a baby in 1999 and the baby died when it was 5, but she's full of shit, just making up lies in hopes we'll associate with her again.
I swear, my mother is like this, 25 years after they divorced, and she doesn't understand why it had any effect on me. It shouldn't have, because it was her divorce, and not mine.
My dad died from an overdose when I was 12 the night before Christmas Eve, and I was the one that found him. That being said, I'm cool with it nowadays, but my aunt talks about him like,
You know, when my brother died.
when speaking about it to me, and when I tried to be like, hey, he was my dad. I was a daddy's girl and he was a great father, and I found him. Can I like, have a hug or something? But she pretty much explained it like,
Yeah, but I had more time on Earth with him, so I miss him more than you could.
So my grandpa died. His son, who's my uncle, went around asking for money to give to his now widowed mother. He collected around $500 worth of donations from family, friends, etc. He pocketed it and my grandma didn't receive shit.
Damn, I hope he's been excommunicated from the family now.
Sadly no, he's unemployed and my mom regularly sends money over to support his own family.
My grandma was like that with her son. In her eyes, he never did wrong. He's in his 60s and I think he's worked maybe a month. She believed in him until the end, which came at his hands. He visited a dozen ATMs later that day to drain her account. I'm really sorry you've got a lousy uncle.
At my grandfather's funeral, one of the choir members essentially threw a tantrum and ended up interrupting one of my uncles, who was giving a speech just because she wasn't given any food. The thing is, there wasn't any food at the funeral to begin with.
I'm trying to think of some caveat that makes this not completely insane, perhaps a diabetic emergency.
I don't know. She felt entitled to a free meal because,
Like, I've done a lot of work.
my aunt ended up throwing a chair at her head.
A funeral without food for the guests is just weird to me. Where I come from, we always make sure to have water and sandwiches for guests at the bare minimum, usually banh mi sandwiches. Things like coffee, donuts, pastries, etc. can be found at the bigger, more expensive funerals.
This was in Kenya. There were too many people/family members to provide food for. There were over 700 people, over 500 of which were grandchildren.
A friend of the family with a notorious drinking problem showed up to the visitation and service extremely intoxicated. She's not a sad drunk, she's a happy huggy drunk, so she went around sloppily hugging everyone, even people she didn't know. She slurred introductions and condolences to everyone for about an hour, then tripped over a seat in one of the sitting rooms of the funeral home and face planted.
Yes. This is what I want my funeral to be like one day. Open bar, fun stories, everyone getting shit-faced and trying to deal. I imagine I will have to set it up ahead of time though. Oh, and it won't just be the one person.
Alright, So my uncle died, and at his funeral my cousin, his son, was crying. Some old-timer uncle came up to him and said,
"Will you stop crying? You're a man. You're embarrassing us."
I never wanted to slap someone at a funeral more than at that moment.
You could have slapped that man right in the face, and it would still be more appropriate than whatever the F he did.
My minister once told a story. He was waiting in a room off the sanctuary before the funeral when he heard scuffling noises. When he went to investigate, the brother and sister of the deceased had pulled the body out of the casket and propped it between them. They explained that they didn't have a recent photo of the three of them and were delighted he showed up to take the picture.
Wow. I don't know if that's the creepiest or saddest thing I've heard.
Weird as it is, that was actually a common practice when cameras were first invented. Most people couldn't afford to own one, but they wanted pictures to remember the deceased, so the deceased would first be dressed up in nice clothes and pose with the family, so the family could have that one last memory. Then the funeral happens.
So after the eulogist had talked for 45 minutes, the pastor went over to the lectern and politely asked him to conclude his eulogy. The guy boldly told the pastor,
"I'll stop when I'm damn good and ready,"
and proceeded talking for about 20 more minutes. The total funeral church service lasted for 2¾ hours. It seemed endless.
My cousin died at 14 years old from taking a dodgy ecstasy pill at a party. At her funeral, another cousin's boyfriend then proceeded to try and sell drugs. At her funeral, last I heard, her dad found him and he and his friends kicked the guy's teeth in.
So at my dad's funeral, one of his old band mates, from about 15 years ago at the time, promoted his new band. It was at the part where people go up to the mic and say some kind words, speeches, etc. My dad had killed himself and some dude used it as a marketing opportunity. There was also a pastor there who was playing hymns. My dad was an atheist. My dad was also dead for over a week. His side of the family decided to have an open casket. He still had rope marks around his neck. There was the stench of decomposition that filled the room. Ugh.
Not at a funeral but at my auntie's wake. A dude approached my little sister and hit on her. She was 12 years old.
This happened to me at my grandfather's retirement party. I was 12 and my grandfather's friends hit on me. They were all in their 70s.
Showing off that you know billionaires, ha.
At the end of my grandmother's funeral, the priest pulled my grandfather aside and asked for more donations. My grandfather has donated thousands over the years to the church. The fact that the priest asked at my grandfather's wife's funeral is disgusting. I didn't know, however, until we had left, otherwise I would have probably punched him.
It's like the old joke about a man on his deathbed who's being hounded by his priest.
Come on, leave more money to the church.
And his son.
No, leave more money to your kids.
So he tells the priest.
Okay, I'll donate, as long as the dedication plaque says, given by a man who died as Jesus did, in between two thieves.
Okay, so my mom passed away 2 days before my first child was born. I didn't get pregnant again until 11 years later, so I was 5 months pregnant with my second child when my father passed. Someone came up to me at the funeral and said to me,
"You should really stop having kids, it's bad luck for your family."
Taking a swig from a flask, not too horrible in general, but it was a funeral for a girl that had died due to a drunk driver.
Pure tone deaf.
My uncle was cremated. He lived across from a lake and it was decided that we wanted his ashes spread on this little island on this lake. I was tasked with swimming with the urn from the boat to the island, holding it out of the water. I then stood at the edge of a small cliff with my nephews beside me and all the family watching in the boat. I opened the urn to dump his ashes over the cliff. We all say a few things, and as I go to dump the ashes, the wind picks up and blows the ashes all over my wet body. One of the worst things that ever happened to me.
Thanks for watching. Guys, if you liked the video, please leave a like for the algorithm. And be sure to check out my other videos. And if you didn't, let me know in the comment section. Alright, till next time.